look around whatever room you are in right now. I mean, look past the screens, the lighting, all that decor, and just focus on like the most mundane piece of furniture you have nearby.
You're talking about the chair, right?
Exactly, the chair. We just treat it as this completely passive object. It's just a place to park our physical bodies while our brains go to work.
Yeah.
But what if that piece of furniture is actually quietly rewriting your entire neurological future?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Right. Because a few years ago, there was this prominent Mayo Clinic doctor who sparked this massive debate with a quote you've probably heard. He said, "Sitting is the new smoking."
Right, which is, quite a claim.
He actually went further. He said excessive sitting is more treacherous than parachuting and statistically causes more mortality than HIV, which, I mean, sounds a bit crazy.
It is. I mean, it is a deliberately hyperbolic statement for sure.
Yeah.
But it really effectively forces us to confront this severe evolutionary mismatch.
Okay, what do you mean by evolutionary mismatch?
Well, we are biologically adapted to perceive acute immediate threats, right? So if you jump out of an airplane without a parachute, the physical consequence is undeniable. And it's instant.
Right, gravity takes over.
Exactly. But sitting in a heavily bolstered, ergonomic office chair for 8 hours a day, the consequence of that is totally silent.
It just sneaks up on you.
Yeah, it literally takes decades for that physiological debt to compound. And because it lacks that immediate visceral danger, we just categorize it as completely harmless.
And unpacking that delayed consequence is the entire mission of our deep dive today. We've got this massive stack of recent medical literature, longitudinal studies, metabolic research, and we're going to get into the exact biological mechanisms linking how we move our bodies to how our brains fundamentally age.
Because the data is showing that your office chair isn't just giving you lower back pain, it's actually altering the physical architecture of your cognition.
Which is terrifying. And we're going to look at this across the whole human lifespan, right? From midlife choices all the way to this really bizarre link between hand grip strength and finding the right words in your 60s.
Yeah, the sources we're analyzing today really map out this trajectory. They show how structural biomechanics literally dictate neurodegeneration.
Okay, so to understand the baseline here, let's start with what scientists consider the mechanical ideal. I was looking at the study published in the journal Diabetologia. It was led by researchers at Swinburne University.
Oh, yeah, the thigh sensor study.
Yes.
Yeah.
They completely bypassed the standard method of having people self-report their exercise.
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, we all lie on those surveys.
Absolutely. Everyone exaggerates.
Right. So instead, they attached these highly sensitive accelerometers directly to the thighs of like over 2,300 adults, just to track their exact orientation and movement over a full 24-hour cycle.
Which is just such a crucial methodological upgrade, honestly. When you rely on memory, a leisurely 20-minute stroll to get coffee suddenly becomes a brisk cardiovascular workout on paper.
Right, we give ourselves a lot of credit.
Exactly. But thigh sensors measure the literal angle and the sustained contraction of the muscle fibers. So the data they got is entirely objective.
And that objective data produced what I can only describe as like the most demanding, stressful pie chart for daily living I have ever seen.
It's pretty intense.
It really is. To optimally regulate your risk of heart disease and diabetes, they mapped out the perfect 24-hour cycle. Ready for this?
Let's hear it.
Okay, it requires 8 hours and 20 minutes of sleep, 6 hours of sitting, 5 hours and 10 minutes of standing, 2 hours and 10 minutes of light to moderate activity, and 2 hours and 10 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity.
Yeah. From a purely physiological standpoint, that is the metabolic sweet spot.
Right.
But I completely acknowledge that looking at those numbers feels incredibly daunting for, anyone operating in the modern economy.
Daunting is an understatement. It's a full-time logistical puzzle. But the paper makes it really clear why those exact thresholds exist. If you push past that 6-hour mark for sitting, it initiates this steep cascade of risks.
A 16% increased risk of all-cause mortality, to be exact.
Wow. 16%.
Plus massive spikes in the probability of developing dementia and heart disease.
So help me understand the actual mechanics here.
Right.
Why is exactly 5 hours and 10 minutes of standing fundamentally different from sitting? Like, what is happening at the cellular level when my glutes are just resting in a chair?
It really comes down to glucose clearance and vascular shear stress.
Okay, unpack that for me.
So when you're standing, even if you are relatively still, the large postural muscles in your legs and your core are constantly firing. They're making these micro contractions just to keep you upright against gravity.
Right, you're not just a statue.
Exactly. And those contractions require ATP, which is cellular energy. That means your muscles are actively pulling glucose out of your bloodstream to fuel that.
Makes sense.
Furthermore, those contractions stimulate the production of an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, or LPL.
LPL, got it.
Right. And LPL breaks down fat in the blood. But the moment you sit down, that electrical activity in your legs essentially flatlines.
Wait, so the muscles just shut off their internal vacuum cleaners?
Effectively, yes. Without those microcontractions, LPL production just plummets. So your body's ability to clear circulating triglycerides drops dramatically.
Oh, wow.
And insulin resistance begins to climb within mere hours. The blood pools slightly in your legs, the sheer stress on the cells lining your blood vessels decreases, and that signals your entire vascular system to physically stiffen.
Okay, so the biological imperative makes total sense. But honestly, the proposed behavioral solutions in the literature seem utterly disconnected from reality.
You're talking about the timer rules.
Yes.
Sure.
The sources highlight this framework from a Cornell University professor. It's known as the 20-8-2 rule.
Right.
You're supposed to sit for 20 minutes, stand for 8 minutes, and move for 2 minutes. Every single hour.
It's a lot to keep track of.
I mean, using an egg timer to violently interrupt your workflow every 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It sounds like trying to cook a complex 5-course meal while the fire alarm goes off on a loop.
It's very disruptive.
How does a normal office worker or like someone working a customer service line with a strict call quota realistically pull this off without getting fired?
It's a deeply frustrating paradox, and honestly, it points to a recurring failure in public health messaging.
How so?
We have this tendency to individualize systemic architectural problems. If you are a dispatcher tethered to a headset or, a junior analyst trapped in back-to-back board meetings, an egg timer on your desk is utterly useless.
Right. You can't just leave.
Exactly. It doesn't empower you. It just serves as this constant ticking reminder of a metabolic standard that your environment literally forbids you from reaching.
Sorry to interrupt this critical client pitch, but my 20 minutes are up. I need to go pace around the conference table. It's just absurd.
Which is exactly why the more progressive literature points toward organizational frameworks, like the Be Upstanding program mentioned in the sources.
What does it entail?
The core thesis there is that the individual is not the variable that needs to change. The environmental architecture is.
Okay, so fixing the office itself.
All right. Solving this requires structural intervention. It means re-engineering corporate spaces so standing desks are just the default infrastructure.
Normalizing walking meetings, things like that.
Yes, exactly. And completely decoupling the metric of employee productivity from the metric of physical immobility.
But until those corporate utopias become the standard, we're left dealing with the physiological fallout.
We are.
So if the environment enforces this sedentary behavior, at what point does that vascular stiffness and insulin resistance actually start physically degrading the brain?
Well, the sources overwhelmingly point to midlife as the critical window.
Though it's probably worth noting that researchers are currently investigating how extreme sedentary behavior is suppressing brain-derived neurotrophic factor in teenagers too.
Yes, BDNF, which means this really begins in adolescence.
Right.
And the teenage data is alarming because BDNF is just so critical for neuroplasticity and synaptic growth. If you suppress those pathways during crucial developmental windows, you lower the entire neurological baseline.
Wow. But midlife is kind of the tipping point.
Yeah, midlife is the crucible. That's the decade where the cumulative metabolic stress really starts to outpace the body's compensatory mechanisms.
Let's dig into the UT Health San Antonio study then, because they tracked 402 adults with an average age hovering around 58.
A really important demographic.
Right. And the researchers established this striking premise. Nearly 40% of all Alzheimer's cases are rooted in modifiable risk factors, things we can actively alter.
40% is a massive chunk.
It really is. To measure this, they use the American Heart Association's Life's Simple 7 framework. So they track diet, smoking, activity, blood pressure, BMI, cholesterol, and fasting glucose. But the truly compelling aspect of this study was the demographics.
Yes, this is so vital. The cohort was 52% Hispanic, predominantly Mexican-American, and 48% non-Hispanic white.
Why does that split matter so much?
Because Hispanic older adults face a significantly disproportionate burden of Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. Yet they are historically almost systematically, excluded from large-scale longitudinal neurological research.
So this study was long overdue. And when they actually analyzed the data, the pathways to preserving cognitive function were drastically different between the two demographics.
Like night and day.
For the Mexican-American participants, the absolute strongest protector against cognitive decline was physical activity, literally any level of it.
Right.
But for the non-Hispanic white participants, the primary neurological shield was maintaining a fasting blood glucose level below 126.
Milligrams per deciliter, yeah.
I keep visualizing this like looking at two completely different models of cars.
Yeah.
For one model, the absolute priority to keep the engine from catastrophic failure is changing the oil like managing the blood sugar.
Okay, I like that analogy.
But for the other model, the only way to prevent a breakdown is to take it out on the highway and run the engine hard. The physical exercise. Why would the human brain's primary defense mechanism vary so wildly based on these demographics?
It really reveals that cognitive decline is heavily modulated by broader physiological context. We have to look at the baseline rates of metabolic syndrome.
Okay, what does that mean in this context?
Well, Mexican Americans, due to a really complex intersection of genetic predispositions, environmental factors, and systemic socioeconomic stressors, generally present with much higher baseline rates of metabolic syndrome.
So they have more risk factors right out of the gate.
Right, a clustering of high blood pressure, elevated triglycerides, and insulin resistance.
So their baseline metabolic stress is already elevated.
Yes, and in a physiological environment that is already highly inflamed and insulin resistant, introducing physical activity acts as this incredibly powerful systemic override.
Like flipping a master switch.
Exactly. The mechanical action of the muscles forcing glucose out of the blood and improving vascular flow offers a dramatic, sweeping protective effect for the brain. It actively combats all that inflammation.
Whereas the non-Hispanic white cohort had a different baseline entirely.
Precisely. In that cohort, where baseline physical activity might have been historically different, or overall metabolic syndrome rates were lower, the sheer toxic effect of circulating blood sugar became the isolated driver of decline.
Because fasting glucose above 126 is the clinical threshold for diabetes, right?
It is. And when glucose levels sit that high, the sugar molecules physically damage the delicate endothelial cells that make up the blood-brain barrier.
They just break it down.
Yeah, they degrade the selective permeability of that barrier. And that allows systemic inflammation to just seep into the brain tissue over years and years.
That sets up a terrifying yet fascinating progression. We've been talking about the cardiovascular system and metabolic pathways as the delivery mechanisms to the brain. But what happens when the actual physical scaffolding of the body, the muscle tissue itself, begins to structurally break down?
Now we are moving into the territory of sarcopenia.
Right. Our sources define sarcopenia not just as, like, getting a little weaker with age. They describe it as a progressive neuromuscular disorder characterized by accelerated muscle loss, plummeting strength, and degraded physical function.
It's a severe clinical condition, not just normal aging.
Exactly. And a study in the journal Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience examined older adults to map exactly how this physical wasting translates to cognitive decay. They utilized the Montreal Cognitive Assessment to grade brain function.
The MoCA is an excellent diagnostic tool.
Why is it better than just a standard memory test?
Because it isolates specific neural networks. It doesn't just test if you are generally, sharp. It forces the brain to perform distinct operational tasks.
Well, the breakdown of those tasks in the study is deeply unsettling. The participants with sarcopenia exhibited global cognitive drops, sure, but they profoundly failed in specific domains.
Right. Calculation, delayed recall, executive function, and verbal fluency.
Verbal fluency was a huge one. Furthermore, during a 12-week follow-up period, as their physical muscle atrophy worsened, their verbal fluency scores demonstrably crashed in tandem.
It's important to clarify what verbal fluency actually tests, though.
It's not just how many words you know.
No, it isn't a measure of your overall vocabulary. It is a strict test of executive control and retrieval speed. It asks the brain to rapidly scan its database, organize the information logically, and produce it under pressure.
So it's a very heavy cognitive lift.
Extremely. That requires incredibly robust synchronization between the prefrontal cortex and the parietal lobe.
But the physical metric the researchers link this to is the part I find hardest to swallow.
The grip strength.
Yeah. The key indicator of this cognitive freefall wasn't muscle mass. It didn't matter how large their biceps or calf muscles were. The metric that predicted brain function was muscle strength, specifically grip strength in men.
I know, it sounds wild.
Let me push back on this because it sounds borderline like pseudoscience. You were telling me that the mechanical force I can apply to a plastic hand dynamometer predicts how efficiently my prefrontal cortex can retrieve a word from my memory.
That's what the data shows.
But how does squeezing my hand have any direct biological wire to the dictionary in my head?
I completely understand the skepticism. I really do. It forces us to discard a very outdated mechanical view of human anatomy.
Okay, re-educate me.
We have spent centuries conceptualizing muscles as just dumb tissue. Pulleys and levers that exist solely to move the skeleton from point A to point B.
Right, just meat on the bone.
Exactly. But to understand the grip strength correlation, we have to introduce the muscle-brain axis. Muscles are not just structural meat. They are highly active endocrine organs.
Wait, endocrine organs? Like the thyroid or the pancreas?
Absolutely. When a muscle fiber contracts, whether you are squeezing a grip tester, deadlifting a barbell, or simply pushing yourself up out of a chair, that mechanical tension triggers the muscle to synthesize and secrete hundreds of specialized proteins and peptides directly into your bloodstream.
Into the blood.
Yes. We call these myokines.
So the muscle is actually manufacturing its own chemical messengers.
It's a massive pharmaceutical factory inside your own body.
That is mind-blowing.
It really is. And one of the most critical myokines it produces is interleukin-6, or IL-6.
Okay, what does IL-6 do?
Well, during sustained muscular exertion, IL-6 levels in the blood can increase up to 100-fold. Now, you asked earlier about the blood-brain barrier keeping out toxins from high blood sugar, right?
Right, the endothelial cell.
Yes. That barrier is heavily guarded by tight junctions. But during exercise, the physiological changes in your body actually alter the permeability of that barrier and upregulate specific transport proteins.
So the gates open a little bit.
Exactly. This allows myokines like IL-6 to selectively cross over from the bloodstream directly into the brain tissue.
And what does the IL-6 do once it breaches the barrier?
It acts as an incredibly potent neuroprotectant. It suppresses localized neuroinflammation. But more importantly, it directly stimulates the hippocampus, the memory consolidation center, to physically undergo neurogenesis.
It builds new brain cells.
Yes. It forces the brain to build new neural pathways and strengthens the synaptic plasticity required for things like rapid verbal fluency.
Oh, wow. So when an older adult develops sarcopenia, they aren't just losing the mechanical ability to, open a stubborn jar of pasta sauce.
No, it's much more serious.
They're literally losing the endocrine glands that produce the chemicals keeping their brain networks online.
Precisely. In fact, the study explicitly noted that severe sarcopenia correlates with measurable physical gray matter volume loss in the parietal lobe.
The brain physically shrinks.
Exactly. The parietal lobe is critical for integrating sensory information and language processing. When you lose muscle quality, the myokine signaling drops to a trickle.
So the brain is essentially starved.
Yes, starved of its structural fertilizer, and the networks degrade. The parietal lobe literally shrinks. So going back to your skepticism about the grip tester.
Right, the plastic dynamometer.
Your hand is not wired to your brain's dictionary. Grip strength is simply the most easily accessible, highly accurate proxy for the overall functional quality of your central nervous system and your muscular endocrine output.
Because if your grip is weak...
If your grip is weak, your myokine production is compromised and your brain is vulnerable.
That is a total paradigm shift.
Yeah.
It completely changes the stakes of how we navigate our day.
It really does.
For everyone listening right now, the way you allocate those 24 hours isn't just about managing your waistline or hitting some generic cardiovascular target. You are actively architecting the physical structure of your future cognition.
You're building your brain with your body.
Exactly. We've traced the timeline today. Managing your fasting glucose in your 50s protects the blood-brain barrier from microscopic degradation.
Right?
Fighting for movement in a sedentary workplace keeps the LPL enzymes clearing the blood. And building actual functional muscle strength preserves the endocrine factories that keep your parietal lobe from physically shrinking.
The synthesis of all these diverse studies is that biomechanical movement is quite literally neurological medicine. They are inseparable systems.
And we want to assure you, you do not need to obsess over achieving that mathematically rigid, high-stress Swinburne pie chart every single day.
No. Please don't stress over exactly 5 hours of standing.
Right. If your environment forces you to sit, there are other scientifically validated interventions to protect the brain.
Yes, diet is a huge one.
The sources heavily emphasized that adopting a strict Mediterranean diet provides the structural lipids and antioxidants the brain needs to resist inflammatory damage.
And we also saw some interesting data on supplements.
We did. The literature shows that something as accessible as a daily creatine supplement, which, we typically associate with bodybuilders.
Right, the gym bros.
Yeah. But it actually enhances ATP production directly in the brain, measurably improving working memory and attention spans in older adults. Every time you choose to take the stairs, every nutrient-dense meal you eat is a compounding deposit into your cognitive reserve.
It's about building a robust physiological buffer. You are insulating your future self against inevitable decline.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over. We are incredibly conditioned by the fitness industry to view our muscles purely through an aesthetic lens.
Getting toned, getting a six-pack.
Right, or strictly as the engines that burn off the calories we consumed at lunch.
Yeah.
But if our muscles are actually endocrine glands, if every bicep, quad, and hamstring is a localized pharmacy designed to pump out the exact chemical molecules required to keep our memory sharp and our words accessible,
It changes everything.
it really does. What if we fundamentally reframed why we exercise? What if we stopped viewing a strenuous walk or resistance training session as a chore to burn calories and started viewing it as the deliberate act of our body actively brewing medicine for our thoughts?
I love that phrasing. Brewing medicine.
The chair might be the silent hazard of the modern world, but your muscles hold the chemical antidote. Keep that in mind the next time you think about taking a seat.